Shawn, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, sir. Good to be back.
So we did a previous episode talking about the dangers of AI and how it's going to manipulate the entire population, how to combat it, which was fascinating. And so today, so you're no stranger to the show, so today we're going to get into the Monroe Institute and remote viewing, how you got involved in that, what's the Monroe Institute, talk about, some of the stuff that CIA and the Monroe Institute have collaborated on, and when it comes to remote viewing. It's the Monroe Institute has been a topic on. I have a sheet of different topics that I'm very interested in, that I want to interview people about, and on the same sheet is a list of names. It's like a dream list of who I want to interview.
Yeah.
Monroe Institute and remote viewing has been on there. It was one of the first things I put on the list, and then we had a conversation. Let's just get right into it. What is the Monroe Institute?
So the Monroe Institute is one of the, if not the premier research institutes for consciousness expansion. That begs the question, okay, so what is consciousness? And consciousness is that place within us that we observe from. It's a separate space from our minds. When you reach out of your body into consciousness, you can do things like remote viewing and to see into the future, to discern information, which, by the way, comes from a study that was done 90 times in 33 different independent labs in 14 different countries that showed human beings can literally look into the future regarding a task that they're doing now. Well, expansion out into that consciousness is that practice of taking your mind and going out beyond your body to find out the cool things that you can do with it, and the cool things that you can experience with it, and the new things that you can learn, and the ways that you can use it for things like remote viewing. And so Monroe is that place that helps develop technology to help humans expand that consciousness out beyond their body and do really cool things with it. And that's what the government was using and experimenting with and researching regarding expansion of consciousness, using the human's innate ability to reach out beyond the body into consciousness to do cool stuff. That's what Monroe is. There's evidence that proves that this stuff is effective. In the case of Joe McMoneagle, who was remote viewer number 1 for the Army Intelligence and CIA program that they put together, his evidence is irrefutable. Like, that's on government record that he did all this stuff and was able to go to other places from his living room in Virginia and then out an entire nuclear sub-program for the Russian military, where he was the only one in the room who drew the sub with all these characteristics, and then it proved to be completely accurate. And he drew it from his living room in Virginia. There's this guy, Skip, who was instructed to put together the remote viewing program for the military and CIA because they were getting reports that Russia was doing the same thing, that they were using psychics to look inside the secrets of the United States. So they needed to do an analysis of what kind of risk they were talking about and whether the United States should also investigate that type of technology.
Russia's doing this too.
Yeah, Russia was doing it at the time, and we were getting reports about it.
So they were ahead of us on this.
Yeah.
Is anybody else doing this that you're aware of?
From what I understand, like every first world nation is implementing this in their intelligence communities.
Wow.
Yeah. But no one wants to talk about it because, first of all, it's woo-woo crazy stuff. Mm-hmm. And second, you don't want to identify your best viewers because, for instance, like Joe was attempted assassinated 3 times.
People listening right now that think this is woo-woo, do a Google search, do a DuckDuckGo search, do a whatever the hell you want search, and just Google Monroe Institute, CIA, and the shit's going to come up. For all of you people that still believe in, you got to hear it from a government source, there it is. It's right there.
Yeah, I mean, they invested millions of dollars in Monroe. Skip, their old program director for remote viewing, came down and was just researching, trying to figure out what a training program might look like for a remote viewer. How do you increase their level of psychic abilities. And this is crazy stuff that they were investigating back then, but they wanted to make sure they weren't investing money in a bad way or they weren't wasting it on charlatans, that type of thing. So he would go out to these places and investigate them. And Bob basically took him around, gave him a tour, but put him in a radio-shielded room with a pair of headphones on, started playing some tones in his ears, and Skip started floating up out of his body. So he thought that was pretty interesting. And so he put Monroe on a short list of places to investigate after he identified some folks who could possibly be good remote viewers. And so then he devised the idea that he said, okay, so we're looking for folks in the intelligence community. How do we find, who might be the psychics? And he looked for folks who were in their jobs longer than they should be. Because he thought, just as a common sense perspective, if these people are tuned into something extra, it's going to be the folks who are surviving longer in a shorter life expectancy job because they're making the right choices at the right times to stay alive. And it just so happened that Joe McMoneagle, who was remote viewer number 1, he had spent 14 years in the field as an operative. And he was in a job that the life expectancy was 20 months, and he'd spent 14 years in that job. So they yanked him in and started interrogating him to ask him to, see if he was a double agent and was getting fed information on the other side. And when they figured out he wasn't, they sent him to Stanford Research Institute for testing, where Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff, which I'm sure those names will ring some bells for folks who are interested in extraterrestrial stuff, because Hal's at the top of that chain as well. Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ were developing a program to try to test remote viewers, and they sent Joe McMoneagle out there, and he tested off the charts. He nailed every one of their tests except for one, and he got a second-place result on the last one.
What are some of these tests?
So basically the tests were, we have a target, you don't know who it is, and that target, through a double-blind process, has been instructed to go to a location. The target doesn't know where the target's a person, the target doesn't know where the location is until they're handed the envelope, tell them to go there. The targets have been randomized and put in envelopes, and then a dice gets rolled for a randomization to select where they're going. And the two people are never in the same room. They don't know each other. The remote viewer goes in a radio-shielded room that's separated in a different building, and the target, randomized location, they get the envelope, they open it up, they go there. And so then it's the job of the remote viewer to say, okay, your target is at a location. Tell us about the location. And that's it. That's all they get. Joe's explanation of remote viewing is like, you imagine a cardboard door in front of you, and you poke a hole in it. And you don't see the whole picture, but you start to see a little bit of it. And you get the little pieces of information about things. And he started drawing what he saw on the target location. And he would nail, and now here's the process of how a separate viewing gets viewed. It's a separate judge who isn't connected with the experiment at all, except he's judging the remote viewing versus multiple targets that could exist. So he doesn't know where the target is either. He gets a randomized selection inside a stack of targets, and he has to take the drawing that the remote viewer has made and the information that the remote viewer has written down, like any smells or any sounds or any images or what's, the shape of a building or something like that. And then he or she has to take that remote viewing drawing, and then match it to a number of things that are before him. So he doesn't know the target. He doesn't know the location. He hasn't had contact with the remote viewer or the target. He just takes a drawing and matches it to a bunch of stuff on a wall. And he says, okay, this looks the most like this. It's got this pattern that he drew. It's got this smell of this flower that's in the picture. It's got, whatever it is. And then at that point, you're graded. And if that independent judge has taken the remote viewer's information and matched it to the correct target, that's a first place finish, first place result. And Joe hit first place result after first place result after first place result. He thought this whole thing was an operation on him. Like, how gullible is this guy? Like, can we string him along? How long is he going to be strung along for that we're telling him he's psychic? Although he kind of knew he was psychic because he'd get hints about operations in the jungle, and he was all throughout Vietnam, and he's gone to 110 countries. He's a legit field operative. So he's getting drops. He's going in and talking to tribal chiefs, making treaties and stuff like that. Like, he's a legit operator. He gets sent to Meade, and he doesn't quite believe that, he doesn't understand what this remote viewing is all about yet because he's brand new to the program. He's brand new to this experiment that they're trying to put together. So he tries to test himself on Skylab in 1978. I think it's coming down from, this is the first USS space station base. Like the International Space Station, there was a Skylab version of it back in the late 70s. Except it ran out of juice and they couldn't use it anymore, and it was going to come down out of orbit and fall down and break apart, but not quite burn up. And so they were really worried that major chunks of this, like refrigerator-sized stuff, was going to come down and land on somebody's head. Telemetry wasn't what it is today, so they had no idea where this thing was coming down or when it was coming down. They just knew it was coming down. It was in a decaying orbit, and eventually it was going to enter the atmosphere and could land literally anywhere on the planet. And they didn't know. And so he was like, all right, I'm going to test myself on this. He said, if I have an opportunity to fail, this is it. Because no one knows where this thing is coming down. And so I'll just go into my remote viewing process that I'm being taught how to do this, go into a meditation, see if I can figure this out. And he came up with a date, and he came up with a location. So this, as far as the scientists were concerned, they were like, okay, this is going to land somewhere, this is going to re-enter somewhere in this 6-month time frame is the best guess.
What year is this? Do you know?
It's like, I think it's like 78. Yeah, so it's back then before they had a bunch of awesome telemetry to know exactly where something was in space. Now they're tracking all kinds of things that are this big in our orbit.
So they have a 6-month window.
Yeah, basically.
Like, it's going to land somewhere. Do they have a hemisphere?
No.
They just know it's going to hit the Earth in a 6-month time frame. Okay.
Yeah, because when it comes down will definitely determine where it lands on the planet, right? If it goes an extra 5 minutes in orbit, well, it could be another continent because of the speed that it's going, right? It's up in orbit at like 17,000 miles an hour or whatever. So, so he wrote down a date, and he walked up and put a pin on the map. And the pin on the map happened to be in Australia. And the date he missed by 6 days. So the date was close, but the pin that he put on the map, he missed the location of reentry by 30 miles, which statistically is 1 in 6,656,000. It's like hitting the lottery numbers on your first try. If you were standing on the location where he put the pin in the map, you could look up and literally see Skylab breaking up in front of you.
Wow.
And so at that point, Joe thought, okay, well, maybe I'll stick with this remote viewing thing for a while.
What was the event that sparked CIA's interest in all of this?
Well, I think they were just motivated to try to investigate whether this had any merit for intelligence gathering and for operational information, because they started getting amazing viewings out of Joe right away. And it's like, okay, well, how many amazing LeBron James of consciousness are there to say, this person can sit in a room and tell me what's going on at a location and potential future events? Because some of the remote viewers that the CIA used were able to produce the effects of nuclear tests that had been secret until the remote viewer said this is going to happen, be able to figure out whether it was going to be a success or a failure, because some of them were failures, and all the intelligence turned out to be correct, and so they were super interested. Joe McMoneagle never missed the location of a nuclear sub in his entire career, so if anyone ever needed to know, like they lost track of where a nuclear sub was for the Russians, they'd go into Joe's office and he goes, right here, and they'd check their sensors and boom, it would be there.
Well, since we're talking about nuclear subs and Joe McMoneagle, tell me the story.
Yeah. Well, the one that made everyone sit up and take notice and got him more funding for a large number of years was when there was a building that was identified by intelligence personnel that became the top priority for the National Security Council. It was the largest building under one roof in the world. and it was high in the Russian tundra near this large body of water. So they thought it might be a manufacturing facility for some type of military craft, and they weren't sure what it was. And everybody wanted to know what was going on inside the building because they had triple death wire fencing. In between all those, they had sentries with dogs, 24-hour site-to-site sentry circle around the property, trains coming in, dumping off raw materials 24/7, food coming in, food service for the people who were working inside the building, and no one knew what was going on inside the building. And so someone at the National Security Council meetings knew that they had a new psychic program down at Meade and sent the manila folder down to Fort Meade, and they handed it to Joe McMoneagle. The first thing they handed him was simply map coordinates. And they said, show us what you see here. And he came up with the building that they were concerned about. And he described the building, and they said, okay, you're on target. And then they gave him a picture of that building. And they said, tell us what's going on inside here. Now, the guys in the National Security Council and all the intelligence guys who were in the room came to the consensus that it was going to be some kind of troop carrier that they could probably transport over to the ocean because it was 4 or 5 blocks away from the ocean, but it was short enough to where they could transport something of medium size over to the ocean to get it into the water. But that was their best guess. Joe McMoneagle was the only person who came up with the result. He dropped into the building and he started viewing this thing, and he viewed it over a number of days and came up with a drawing and an explanation and technical specifications for a brand new submarine. And he said, this is the biggest submarine in the world by far. It's 1.5 times bigger than the next biggest sub. This is the brand new classification of Russian sub. And he came up with a number of very unique characteristics for that sub. And he said, it's not a cylinder. It's a cylinder that looks like it's cut in half, spread out, and then a flat part welded on the top and the bottom. And the U.S. engineers looked at that later after he sent it, and he said, that's impossible. It'd be crushed to depth. It's highly unlikely, et cetera. But then he added the specifications. It's got a special drive propulsion system that I don't want to say too much about, but it's also got canted launch tubes, which means it can fire nuclear missiles on the run without having to stop, which could give us about 20 minutes warning that we're going to lose 1,200 cities. So this is a first strike weapon. And it's, by the way, if you've seen the movie Hunt for Red October, that submarine that they used in that movie was the sub that Joe McMoneagle outed. He said it's almost 2 football fields long, it's 75 feet wide, it's 7 stories tall. He drew, and he's got a video of this that he sent up to the National Security Council. He drew a diagram of the sub with its specifications, with its very interesting technical advancements that the United States didn't have on their subs. And he's got the original tape that he submitted to the NSC, and this has been declassified, so he can share it now. So this is the tape that he reported up to the NSC before the thing was launched, and proved him correct. But he sent all that up, and Robert Gates was the guy who is collecting all the information for the people, disseminating the information for the National Security Council. Didn't even let it through.
Really?
Yeah, because he's like, this came from a psychic. And they're like, yeah. And he's like, he looked at it, and he like looked at the report, and he's like, okay, the sub, the engineers said the sub can't survive at depth. It's way too big. He's the only guy who thinks it's a sub. It's not. They're not going to be able to roll this off into the water. There's no water there, and it's too big to transport over to the ocean. So he wrote total fantasy on top of the report and sent it back to Joe at Meade. Joe was not pleased. He's a little bit of an attitude, and he's a really good operative who's now just been put into this remote viewing thing where he's had some success in. And he's like, I know this is a sub. And so he took that total fantasy remark and he wrote under it. He went back into a meditation and he looked at the sub again. And he looked how far along was it. And he made an estimation of how long it was going to take to launch this thing. And he goes, yeah, well, your total fantasy launches in 112 days. Send it back to Robert Gates at Meade, or at the Pentagon.
How did that go?
Well, Robert Gates has a little bit of an ego. The good news is someone at the National Reconnaissance Office picked up this pissing match, and they were curious. And so they tasked a satellite to do a flyover at 114 days from that date that he said 112 days. And they snapped pictures of the Red October submarine, 7 stories high, 75 feet wide, almost 2 football fields long, canted launch tubes, special propulsion, the whole thing. He nailed it all.
Are you serious?
Yeah. 2 cylinders separated with flat pieces in between, right next to a brand new canal that they built right next to the building in from the sea, so they could roll it off into the water. So they built a canal in the 4 months that he said they were going to launch it in, and just dumped it into the canal right next to the building. So that was interesting. And they were 2 days into, they had all their hatches wide open because they were loading reactor cores and missiles 2 days into the process of loading missiles. So he nailed it to the day, including all the specifications. And no one believed him. And it was one of the greatest information gathering operations for any launch of any Russian equipment since and to this day. The fringe folks who were starting to investigate remote viewing and sending tasks down to Meade became most of the intelligence agencies in the United States government started overtasking the remote viewers down there. So they got crushed. It was a constant barrage of life or death situations. Tell us what you can see. These are special operations that are going live. Tell us which way we need to turn. What's going on? Somebody just got kidnapped. We got probably 18 hours before he's dead. Help figure out where he went. A lot of missing people and missing operators. To tell us where he is, we'll go get him. And that was taxing on a lot of those remote viewers, and they got burned out pretty quick. And so that's where Monroe Institute stepped in to help provide a training program that could give them a faster cool down and a deeper focus on being able to get good information in a quicker time, so that they didn't have to spend so much time prepping and meditation to be able to get in and get a good viewing on something.
How long are these guys spending in meditation?
Well, it depends on the viewer. Like in the early days, I think Joe told me he was spending, 45 minutes to an hour to try to figure out a place where he could get to where he could get a good bit of information. Later in his life, when he was doing remote viewing, like for one example, he got a call one night when he was in Las Vegas from the local sheriff who was looking for a missing child. And the mom thought the child was with dad, and the dad thought the child was with mom, and it's getting dark when they figured out the child is missing. And it's in Virginia wilderness and in the county in which Joe lived. And there's wild animals, and it's getting cold at night, and the kids may not make it. He got a call in the middle of the night by the sheriff who's like, let's get the psychic on the phone. And Joe immediately picked up the phone, closed his eyes for like 5 seconds, and then basically told the sheriff, he goes, send your deputy out this road to this particular location. Have him stop the car, get out of the car, get his compass out. And at 318 degrees on his compass, I want you to walk 1,209 steps. Stop, call the child's name out, and he will respond. And that was like within 5-10 seconds of getting the call and asking, what the details were. And then he gave a reading. And so he goes back to bed thinking, okay, hopefully they're going to find the kid. If they follow his directions, they will. About 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, you get another call in his hotel room, and he's pissed because it's ringing the phone in the middle of the night again. So he gets up, grabs the phone. Hello? Joe, we sent our officer out there to the spot where you said, and he pulled out his compass, but this officer just said he got back from training last week regarding missing children, and he said the statistics are that kids 10 and under will not walk up a hill when they're lost. But he's looking at his compass reading, and it goes directly up a steep hill. What do you want us to do? And his answer was immediate. It's like, do what I told you to do. Click. And so then another 5-10 minutes goes by, and he gets another call, and he picks up the phone a little softer this time because I think he had a feeling that they found him. He's like, "Did you find him?" And she goes, "Yes, Joe. Thank you very much. Good night." And so the officer, against his training, went up the hill, 1,209 steps, followed the directions, stopped where he was, called out the child's name, and the kid answered him because he had walked up the hill to get to a cabin, and he was sleeping on the back porch sofa of a cabin that was deserted at the time, but it had a light on. And he was a 5-year-old kid, and he said, "My daddy said if I ever got lost, walk to the closest light and stay there." And so he went up the hill and was sleeping on the back porch of that cabin. And Joe sent that state trooper up the hill, called out his name, and the kid woke up and answered him.
Wow.
And it took literally 5 seconds for him to get the original viewing and that all that stuff's like documented, right? I mean, these aren't, bullshit, made up stories. Like, he's got legitimate government records, and he was awarded the Legion of Merit after retiring for all of the stuff and all the aid that all the operational intelligence that he provided that saved people's lives. I mean, there's so many people out there listening right now who are saying, "Oh, this is complete bullshit." And there are a lot of scientists out there who are like, "Okay, well, show me a peer-reviewed published study that shows that this stuff can occur." And, even with the Joe McMoneagle, the argument is N equals 1 isn't really proof of anything. Like, one guy might have amazing abilities for whatever reason. To get it to the bottom of this, we need to study it a lot more. And it doesn't even prove that more than one person has this. There was actually a really cool study that I want to tell you about that proves that average humans can look into the future. And this is without a doubt, like, beyond Six Sigma proof, which is science's gold standard of this is a phenomena, that type of statistical proof that human beings can literally look into the future. And it was on an ironclad study that even the most vehement skeptics weren't able to poke any holes in. And it started with a study that was done on what's called priming. So they put a bunch of people in a chair in front of a computer system, and the computer ran the whole experiment, randomized the whole thing, selected out of a database, grabbed images and words that were connected with a study that they wanted to do regarding putting a picture of, let's say, a kitty in front of somebody. And so they show you this picture of this kitty on the screen, and then a few seconds later, they give you the option to select cute or ugly, binary choice. So you press button 1 or button 2, and then they measure you, because it's a computer, they can measure down to the split second, 100th of a second, how fast you're selecting your word associated with the image. But then they make it complicated one step further. For 1/30th of a second, before they even show you the picture of the kitty, randomly selected of the two words, they will flash one of the words in front of you that your conscious awareness can't pick up, because we can't see 1/30th of a second, but the subconscious does pick it up. So your subconscious mind sees the 1/30th of a flash of the word right before they show you the kitty. And it's either cute or ugly that they flash before it. Now, if it's cute, you'll select cute faster. If you think kitties are cute, you might hate kitties. I don't know. You might say, all cats are ugly, right? They control for all that. But basically, if they flash ugly before the kitty, then it will take you a split second longer to select cute. And this is a perfect study, because there's no study investigator and human interaction, so there's no human-to-human interface interaction that can occur there to where you're skewing the results. There's no clue about what the selection needs to be from any other source. It's just a computer running the experiment. So this is from a psychological sciences perspective, this is a perfect study, because it's only a human being being measured by a computer with a completely randomized set of data that's being placed in front of the human and measuring how fast they can react to something based on a stimuli that they put right before the whole process goes through.
Okay.
Okay.
Help me understand how this is looking into the future.
Okay. This next study switches it around. So this next researcher who wanted to investigate whether or not this primer had any influence on these people in the future, he took the primer from over here at the beginning of the process and he simply put it over here at the end of the process. So then the new experiment became I'm going to show you a picture of a kitty or whatever, and then I'm going to give you 2 words, and then at the end, in that 1/30th of a second flash, after you have already made your choice, after you've already pressed your button and made your decision, we're going to flash the primer afterwards. So there should be absolutely no way, if you're looking at the picture, selecting your word, and then getting a primer afterwards, that primer should influence the speed at which you make your decision and click your button on whichever word you want to choose, right? Should have absolutely no effect, except it did. The primer flashed after your decision, altered the timing in which you could select the cute or ugly word choice in the same way that it did when you put it before. And not only did it occur, it occurred in 90 different experiments in 33 different independent labs in 14 different countries to over a 6 sigma significance.
What other kind of courses do they offer over at Monroe Institute?
Well, I just got done with the Discovery program, which scans your brain and shows you your brain waves in deep meditation and through the experiences that they give you. They also have courses where you can go in and try to connect with extraterrestrial entities, that kind of stuff. Because if we're connected with consciousness, that means they're likely connected with consciousness too. And you can reach out and say hi non-locally through being wherever you are at the moment that you are and the place that you are, and reaching out and saying hi, because non-locality means there's no limitation of space and time to get a message through. You can go out and look for lost souls that haven't quite made it to heaven yet and lead them where they were confused, lost their life suddenly or whatever it is, and they're wandering around. They don't know where they're going. Find them and kind of hand-hold them to this central location where they can then zip off to their final destination. Like, they do cool, crazy, weird, awesome stuff like that. But that has real-world evidence of, like, they would go in and they'd talk to someone who was lost, and this person who was lost would give them information about they were on a ship and they were, a chef or a galley crew, and that the ship's name was XYZ, and they grew up in this specific little village in Ireland, and all that stuff would check out. Like, they did the research after the fact, and all the information that someone that they would interface with would give them all this information, and then it would check out historically that there was a ship of that name, and it did sail from the port that they said it would sail from, and that there was a village that had that family name in it, and all this other stuff. But then you're able to go look at the brain scan afterwards and say, okay, was I really viewing somewhere far off, or was that my imagination? And then you look at the brain scan, and the frequencies that your imagination are correlated to weren't even firing at the moment. So you're like, well, science suggests that's not my imagination. Like, I'm not filling in the blanks artificially. So maybe my experience was something far away. It's a cool place.
Yeah, I can't wait to check it out.
You gotta go.
I cannot wait to check it out.